Welcome everyone to the Music X podcast, an extension of the Music X newsletter, which is a newsletter that is published weekly on Substack and covers everything from advanced technologies and innovation in the music industry. Tries to be thought-provoking and definitely aims to allow people to strategize around how to use, implement, and experiment with any of these topics. We're doing this podcast because Gareth Deacon, and I, Martin Walraven, were having lots of conversations. And we felt that even though there's a lot of discourse that sits around the Music X newsletter, there's definitely a potential for more and also to talk to more people. So we started this podcast. We're tackling it through thematic seasons, the first one being artificial intelligence. We're smack bam in the middle of it. We're talking to Raffaella De Santis, a digital media lawyer, someone who has already for more than 10 years sat at the forefront of music, innovation, the law, IP, and all of the topics that most of us don't really understand or know about, but that are very important for any advanced technologies implementation in the music industry.
Yeah, an amazing conversation, right? I mean, Raphael has such an interesting perspective on so many aspects of everything that's been happening and where we're going. I mean, it went wider than I thought, right? We were talking about culture and kind of building the rails for culture and how law and
we went really macro.
Yeah, it was kind of wild, and it wasn't what I was thinking, right? I thought we'd be talking about the cases and various other things, and the aim of this podcast has always been to try and avoid things that timestamp it. So that was great, but like actually we went off, and it was like super interesting. I mean, the idea that the law always follows innovation, and that innovation needs to come first. I mean, that runs so counter and is so fractious to so much of the debate that's been going on about what people want or the creative communities want from the law.
And she says the current law around artificial intelligence and copyright is very much under stress.
Yeah.
But also explains very eloquently how crucial it is for societal safety even to get it right.
Yeah, the role of conflict in all of that, and how actually it's part of the process, right? Anyway, we should probably just get stuck straight in, right?
Let's go. We are super excited about this particular episode because we're going to dig into the law, which is always lagging behind history. And we have Raffaella De Santis, who is an excellent lawyer, super on top of things. And we're going to talk about quite a lot of issues that we see and face around licensing and lawsuits. But maybe, Raffaella, you could kick us off by telling us a little bit about what kind of lawyer you are and where your expertise lies.
I'm a digital media lawyer, and I specialize in the interplay between music and technology. And that started for me when I was a kid. I may or may not have been one of those kids that may have been making her playlists on Napster and LimeWire and BitTorrent. But I was also a musician, and I was just absolutely fascinated by music, fascinated by technology, and, you know, creating my own playlists, producing music, creating my own sounds. And my journey into law was at the start totally unrelated to that. I went into a different specialism. I started out as a reputation litigator, which I absolutely loved and enjoyed, and just through sheer coincidence and opportunity sort of found my way back to my personal love, which was music, and my interests being technology and the progress and the proliferation of technology. And here I sit today among a handful of people that specialize in this intersection, and I'm stimulated and flabbergasted and challenged every day by the developments that are going on, and seeing the progress of creation, human creation, and now machine creation. So for me, it's a fascinating area, and one I'm really lucky to work in.
Yeah, and you mentioned machine creation, which is, of course, another way of talking about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's a a difference between these kind of ways of talking about these in terms of like the terminology we use? So we have AI, machine learning, you mentioned machine creation. Does that matter to you?
I think on a personal level, yes, it matters because I'm someone who responds, I feel, to human creation. Will we ever get to a point where artificially generated creative works can evoke the same feelings and emotions? Perhaps we will. Perhaps it won't matter in future. Perhaps the things that we think we're going to fear now may not come to pass. I think there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of preconceptions about what something which is not human created is going to look like, and the reality is we're just at the dawn of this age. We're not going to know, and I'm open-minded enough to think that so long as the end result is there, so long as it evokes or provokes a certain emotional reaction, does it really matter in terms of my own human experience? Possibly it won't. Will it matter on other levels in terms of supplanting human beings at the apex of intelligence and creation? And what does that mean for society? Those are massive questions, and I think it will matter in that context. But for me as an individual, I don't think so.
Do you see the to that point, like in the context of where we are and trying to think about like kind of legal frameworks and thinking about AI? How, this is potentially a big question, so I apologize, but like how do you see the role of law in thinking about those things, right? Like how much is about future gazing to like the unintended or second order effects of decisions we make now? And to your point about that separation of like kind of, what we feel emotively from what maybe is more empirically true, right? Like, so a lot of, is deal making and other sides about protecting current commercial structures, or is it about building like the future for culture? Like how do you think about those things?
I got into law, as I think so many lawyers do, not just for the money, but to do some good and to solve problems, right? And I think the law has its part to play, as it does in any aspect of our lives that it regulates. And why do we have, I think it goes back to, why do we have a system of law? Why do we have a system of rules? And I'll use a really good analogy. Why do we adhere, most of us, to the rules of the road? And the very simple reason that we adhere to the rules of the road is because if you have total chaos, in that context, eventually you'll come to harm. Because eventually someone will do something so egregiously dangerous, which was obviously dangerous, that, without regard to their fellow road users or pedestrians, that it's going to cause harm. And if we all behaved in that way, we would all have no control over our well-being and our safety. And so the reason that we follow rules and laws in the first place is generally because we are willing to tolerate some constraint on our freedoms and our freedom to be autonomous, over the fact that really the better, the overarching good is so that we can all, more or less equally share this roughly the same level of risk about what harm we're going to come to. And so that's really where I see law as having a positive effect, which is to be part of that system of enacting a framework so that we can gain the most utility from this technology, while at the same time protecting the vast section of society from some of the harms which are inevitable to come from the development of technology and tools and how those are used. So I see it much more on a metaphysical level than the detailed, granular, what are we tinkering with here and what are we tinkering with there. I want to sort of put my flagpole in the ground and say, the law has got a really big part to play in how we shape the framework for how this can be of best use to society.
And how do you see yourself and your fellow colleagues, lawyers, lawmakers do that if you're always behind the technology, and maybe now so even more than before, because I mean, when we think about how we ended up with mechanical rights, it was because somebody invented a pianola, and then composers were like, "Hey, yeah, you're stealing my music," and then it took 8 years for this this mechanical right to be put into law in the US, and then it followed everywhere else in the world, right? How do we do that now with the technology just developing so rapidly?
I think there are certain human truths which are incontrovertible and will always continue to apply, which is fundamentally the law follows human behavior and human norms and senses of good and bad, right and wrong, harmful and non-harmful, painful and comfortable. And so the detail, the black letter of the law might always be behind technological innovation. That's a truth. It's probably also by design, you don't want to constrain progress by having it be led by rules and regulations. You want the greatest freedom to be able to create progress in technology. But the thing where we are not behind is we are not behind in the pattern recognition of things which can be used for overarching good and things which can be used in a malicious way, which are harmful. And in that sense, we're not behind. We've already identified, areas where we feel guardrails are needed and protections are needed within copyright, within, all the other uses that AI could be applied to. So I don't think that we are behind in the principle. I think we're on time. Where it comes to figuring out what those frameworks and guardrails should be, what those licensing models should be, how we might want to address areas of copyright law which could be modernized to bring them up to date to our modern understanding of, these value systems of creation versus ownership, monetization. We will get there, and I don't think we can be intimidated or scared by the pace of progress, because that's not going to stop it. We've got to try and meet the challenge for sure.
And how are we thinking about like the rules that we're building that are like engendering that on those two polar scales? So on one scale, you've got this idea that creativity is enabling everyone to make things. And the technology to do so is a wonderful and amazing thing. And then on the other side, we've got there's a certain rarefied class of person that makes things that's better than others, and that should be protected and have value. And both those arguments are seen in the cold light of day have some merit and value, but then that seems to be where the tussle is coming from, and we have very different opposing worldviews. And I'm fascinated, from your point of view, how you see that, or glancing into the future thing. So is conflict like that the only way we get to a resolution of the point that you were describing in terms of how you build those rules from being just in time to be having the conversation, or is there other pathways?
That's a great question on two levels. Is conflict the only way to resolve the debate, or are there other ways? I used to think that conflict could never yield a good result, but I've actually learned as I've gone throughout my career that sometimes conflict is necessary to refine ideas and to really really sculpt a better result. So I don't shy away from conflict, and I think it can have positive results when channeled appropriately. Yeah, sure, there are other ways to resolve debates, but it can sometimes be really effective. Sometimes also the byproduct of that effectiveness is a bit of collateral damage. On the other hand, this is a debate that I've seen throughout my career in music, because you've got these two really opposing positions, and on the music or the artistic side is the viewpoint that my creation sits at the apex of my autonomy as a human, my identity as a human being. I should be able to exploit that monopoly right as I see fit. It's my creation. It's an extension of me as a human being, and it has value. And using market economics would also tell you that it has value to you personally, emotionally, but it also has market value if other people are prepared to pay to consume it, to use it, to view it, to enjoy it. So, you know, what has value in our society is also determined largely by the market. And then you have this other approach to creation, particularly within software creation, coding technology, where essentially it boils down to the mindset that is eventually everything that needs to be created becomes almost a utility. And so there's no point in ring fencing it to the degree where you're monopolizing it, because it will become, you know, code will be built on and built on and built on to create other things. And so these existential building blocks of what you're building, and this goes to the heart of the debate about originality and copyright, you know, what's a copyrightable phrase? Is playing a scale copyrightable because there's only so many notes, right? And these are equivalent arguments. So in software, you have the philosophy that there's no point ring fencing the elemental blocks of what's being created. But if you're creating something extremely novel or patentable, for example, then that would be worth protection. So you've got these two clashes of philosophy which start to protect their inventions at different points in the creation cycle, and they have different philosophies over how they can be used and shared. And watching that clash and trying to resolve that clash is, frankly, you know, why many of us are here, because we're navigating those two different mindsets and trying to engineer compromises and solutions all day, every day.
Yeah, and I think if I can pick up on that point of creation thing, that's interesting to me, because one of the things that I think specifically generative AI is challenging us on is, do we adhere to this thing that we, you know, established in 1709 for the first time with the with the Statute of Anne? It's like the moment of creation is when you record something, right? When you make something copyrightable, when you put it down, when you put pen to paper, when you record something audio wise or something. And maybe that definition is then going to have to change in the near future to make sure that we can take what you're talking about when it comes to like the whole identity part being connected to creation, and it then becoming something that will evolve and it will continue to evolve. There's no single moment of creation. Can we adjust that?
When things become highly iterative and derivative, because we're building upon them all the time, which is the software development community was already there, but they're also now in a situation where they might be one of the areas of expertise and skill which is easily replicated and and replaced by this technology. Would they feel differently now in the face of that reality? But it's true to say that now we are entering an age where we have this massive engine of creation where it's an infinite act, and every single new work that is created or new version that is created, would that attract, is it sufficiently original as we define original to attract copyright? Is it derivative of? Does ownership attract to the original author? Can authorship only be human? At the moment, the way that the law stands is that authorship is a legal right for human beings alone. Obviously, there are many stakeholders which would like to see that particular parameter refined and overturned to include creation by generative and agentic AI systems. The law is going to have to, the law will always follow innovation. It has to. It cannot drive innovation. It must not drive innovation. Innovation has to take place first, and we're going to have to create a system which reflects a reality we want. But as ever, with any system of guardrails in life for things which are so ubiquitous to our existence and of what it means to be human, we're going to have to think very carefully about how we want to shape it. We do have a choice. Do we want to essentially give up on the notion of originality as we know it now and stretch it to mean something different? Will innovation mean that it gets stretched to something different necessarily? Possibly it will. And we start looking at models of protecting usage rather than defining what's original. I mean, look, even as a student, I had a brilliant intellectual property professor who, he just strode into the lecture hall, and his first line out of his mouth was, "There is nothing original under the sun." And I'll never forget that.
Nice.
Because, even then, 20, whatever, how many years ago it was now, even then, we were recognizing that, in essence, what these new technologies are doing, and the power of computation, the speed and the power of computation, which is now going to outpace our brains and the ability of our brains to process and distill information, is that it's going to come to these outcomes far more quickly than we do. We walk around the world, we absorb information, we absorb it consciously and subconsciously, directly and indirectly, and outspits a song or a portrait or a sculpture or a painting or a technology. And we're not necessarily sure of all of our influences. Sometimes we are, because we've deliberately been inspired by something, or we've copied something, or we've adapted something. And sometimes we create unconsciously, not knowing where these inputs have come from. But that process seems slow and clunky in the face of what's being developed now, and the speed at which these machines are going to be able to create things is far faster than what human beings can do.
Gareth, I'd love to hear what you think here with your industry perspective hat on. It's like having worked at Sony, right? How do you think that this is gonna?
Two things. I was an art student before I ever worked in music, and like the first lesson of proper art school, the first year they teach you to draw things. Then you go proper art school, and then they basically stop you drawing things and go, forget all of that. There's no such thing as an original idea. That is literally the first week in art school was exactly the same. So I think that framework is really interesting in the way you positioned it with talking about software creation, like as almost like a cultural software a framework for things that get built upon. Like we've been doing that as humans clearly for a very long time, long before software was basically building stuff on top of stuff as a kind of more tool-based utility instead of maybe a culture-based utility. And I think that's fascinating. But the thing I keep coming back to is like, have we been here before? Like how much of this is net new? Like I remember first iTunes launching and that changing things. I remember streaming changing things, and being on a label. The thing I would say was like probably the second order effect of that, which was like a flattening of the world. Like prior to like streaming, a lot of the power base was regional, based on like who held what catalogs within labels. And like that just sort of diminished, because once you had no physical infrastructure for shipping stuff around, like that seemed to just dwindle, right? It became much more centralized, rights became more centralized. Suddenly everything is global from sort of day one.
And labels reimagined themselves as these licensing businesses, right? Well, they weren't that before. Yeah,
exactly. These big machines, but also like, every music like startup pretty much building anything, things we know right now, is pretty much global from day one, because just like that's how fluid that market is. And then I look at the debate that's going on with AI, and you're like, all right, geopolitics is in all of this. Everyone is throwing around who's going to get the cure for cancer, who's going to solve this, who's going to solve that on like this global scale. And on the one hand, that's great, because like actually parliaments are debating the value of like culture and art in a way that's probably never been done before. It's certainly not in my lifetime. But at the same time, I struggle with trying to work out like how, like that bit to me seems like tech is global. Like, is music global? Like, how do we thread that needle of trying to figure out as an industry, like how we cooperate on a global scale, or do we even need to? Is that not the answer? Is it actually about local? And I genuinely don't know. So love to know what you think from a legal point of view.
What you say is anything net new, and I would say no, it isn't. We have been here before. This is an industrial revolution. Make no mistake about that. This is the dawn of a new age, the AI age, and it's going to disrupt and upend parts of our lives as we know it. And some things will improve and some things will not improve, just as with previous industrial revolutions or adoptions of technology, steam, electricity, sound recordings, photography, you name it. Whenever a new technology comes along, certain things are improved and certain things which you would have hoped to improve don't improve at the same rate or at the same scale. I mean, just this morning, troubleshooting the software for this, we're saying, we're all saying, AI will take over, but technology is not a perfect solution for every single problem, and nor is it a panacea for every single...
I love that this podcast is now the shining example for this.
Yeah, so we've got a way to go before our lives are going to be completely taken over by technology, but the principles which underpin progress and innovation and how we as human beings respond to them will still continue to apply here. It's just that for the first time in human history, we will probably end up not at the apex of the intelligence chain. We will not be the singular most intelligent being on Earth, and that will change how we relate to each other and to technology, and it will necessarily impact how we want to govern ourselves in societies and how we end up regulating something which may have the power to think itself or objectively be more intelligent than our ability to make decisions and process information.
So when you think about those, guardrails that you mentioned earlier, is this where the law comes in? Does it help sort of establish those guardrails to then sort of see, like, this is where this train can kind of go?
I think the law is secondary to the politics, and that goes for any system of rules and regulation. You've got to have the will to put that framework in place, and then you have to design it. I often say to clients and to friends, I feel like I'm an architect in a way. Mm-hmm. In that I'm the designer of this system. So even within law, there's a lot of, if you want to be this kind of advisor, there's a lot of creativity in how you design the system. It might be, boring to many people who are far more creative, like Gareth, who's an artist, by profession. But there's still creativity in how...
That's not something he hears quite often.
But there's still creativity in how you design the system and the shape of the system, the way it moves, the way it can be stretched and pulled like an elastic band to accommodate innovation. And the law, alongside the political and social will to put systems in place, is at the forefront of that protection. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And then when we talk about music, I guess one of the interesting things is that the law also determines in a big way how we can monetize it. And I think that's sort of where a lot of friction is when it comes to AI, is where does it leave people's monetization options, right? Do they completely go off the table? So from like your humble perspective, where do you see those guardrails developing? Because we have had them for, over 100 years, but they probably need to change.
I think the current law is under stress. It's under stress from, needing to define who can enjoy that right in order to monetize. I think, we've got to answer the question of, can originality exist in works derived from the totality of human expression? Is novelty enough? Is there going to be such a thing as novelty anymore? Take out of the picture just the innovations in music technology alone over the last 20 years, from vinyl to cassette tape, the CD, the MP3, MP4, and then going into downloading and streaming.
And that's just distribution, right? Then you have to,
You've seen the barriers to entry for music creators never be so low. It's been far more easy to get your work out there and distributed, but there's never been so much content. There is far more music content, just music, never mind films, programs, art, just music alone. There is more music than we as a human population can ever consume in our lifetimes. And so you do come back then to the argument about, well, what value does something have if no one wants to listen to it? And that's where you say, well, the market determines that value. But are we actually going to walk into a scenario where there's going to be so much content that actually a lot of it will be worthless because we won't be consuming it? It will be there, it will exist, and it might be monetized or it might not be monetized. But is anything going to be monetized if it doesn't resonate, if it doesn't connect, and we don't consume it? So it's a chicken and an egg scenario. But definitely we're going to see a battle between the tech giants and creators, human creators, over who can be an author, what is original, what is novel, what should be novel in this new age. Are we going to have new categories of rights? Are we going to recognize works created that are machine only, or a hybrid of human and artificial creation? Are we going to look at perhaps reframing the concept of originality around the actual mechanical process of creation? And that doesn't just apply to machines, it applies to human beings. The action of taking your paintbrush and putting some paint on it and putting it on the canvas, that's as mechanical as anything that is done by software. So are we going to shift to a use-based type of legal protection? All of these are questions I have just as much as you, and none of us have any answers as yet. And it will be it will be worked out, and it remains to be seen. But it's not merely a legal issue; it's cultural, humanistic, philosophical, economic, and all of those elements need to be considered in tandem.
There, when you were talking about that, is it Javan's paradox, that the economic term that gets thrown around a lot in AI circles, of as like means of production kind of falls, there's surplus, and basically they're just usages are found, right? And it was born in the Industrial Revolution to talk about that kind of era. I wonder about that, because although streaming revenues have sort of plateaued right now, that's exactly what we've seen in music, right? To your point, the means of production and distribution fell to the lowest levels probably ever. Streaming existed first and could take that capacity effectively, right? And you have this massive oversupply, and you have so many different genres and subgenres and people making stuff. And from a net creativity point of view, I'd argue that sounds like an amazing outcome, right? But you get to a point where it saturates, and then you get to this argument that I think you were framing, which is, you have on one side rights owners, music, whatever we want to frame it, right? And then on the other side you have these big tech companies, and I can't help but feel it's like a case of follow the money, right? Because I don't know anyone's having the culture argument at all, right? I don't know where that sits in the world, right? Because everyone is masking the argument about, really, both sides are sort of saying, one side or other, we want to protect the upside in some way or capacity or the other, right? For that's without unpicking the ethics of it or the reasonings behind those things, and just trying to be unbiased. And it's I struggle, because I wonder about this culture argument, right? And where is it being had? Because in our industry, it seems, apart from it's bad to steal stuff, it doesn't seem to be happening. And I'm not knocking that and trying to make a joke out of it, but it just doesn't. That bit strikes me as odd. I don't know how law plays a part in that, but you made this brilliant point about there's these massive chess pieces on the board, right? And it's you have to have kind of a view of the totality of the chessboard to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
And that seems something that's quite challenging at the moment, because it doesn't seem that's entirely in frame.
We're definitely having more conversations in the UK about the protection of art and the human good, the utility of art as an end in and of itself. Is happening here in the UK far more so than I'm seeing in the US. And in fact, some of the stakeholders in the US are looking at the debates that we're having here in the UK, and they were looking similarly a couple of years ago when we were having the streaming inquiry debate, because that also has parallels. There are parallels in that argument, albeit that this is a way bigger picture to have to grapple with. So I do think we are having the artistic value and cultural effect debate here in this country.
Is there a particular element in UK law that helps create this kind of microcosm? Because you could have the streaming debates because like equitable remuneration is enshrined in law, right? So is there a similar thing maybe?
I definitely feel that it is our sensibilities, our values that come first in conjunction with the legal frameworks that we have and want to create.
Sorry, Gareth. There's an interesting analogy. So I just earlier mentioned the Statute of Anne. So when that became law, the first thing that happened was that everybody who was printing,
the printing press.
Yeah, they just moved to Paris.
Yeah.
Right? So everybody left.
That's what happens, right?
That's what happens. Everybody left London, went to Paris because there was no copyright and they could just sell it without having to pay anybody. Which then meant that the laws in France also started to change, etc., etc. And now the argument, of course, in the UK is we need these kinds of laws because otherwise China is just going to take over, right? Because they don't have these laws. Yes. So I would love to have your opinion on this.
There's two ways of looking at anything: the short-term way and the long-term way. And the short-term thinking would be, oh my God, we're behind, we're so behind, China is so in front. They are a country of a population of 1.2, maybe more people as it stands right now. They have all the manpower, the technological expertise in place to absolutely outshine what we're creating here. Well, first of all, I would say, just objectively, why would that be a bad thing? As in, it's innovation. Where it happens, does it matter? I think it's not a question of we don't want to harm people, they do. Of course, that's not the debate. The debate is where is the slider on the scale of what are our values and what do we value more? Economic interests, human interests, creation, quality of life, all of those things. And there are those people that will say that regulation hinders and it's an unnecessary constraint and it slows things down. But fundamentally, I would challenge that in this context because I think we're actually dealing with the very technology which is going to make things way more efficient. So what you might lose in efficiency and speed by regulation, putting up these constraints and these guardrails, you're going to gain back in the efficiencies that this technology is going to afford you. So that would be my answer.
The new president of the IFPI said a really interesting thing, and she was like, look, basically, if you go to try and lobby and win against big tech on big tech terms, you will not win. They got more money, big global thing, global innovation, fights for cancer, save the world, take us to Mars, do away with any need for human bodies or whatever else is being planned. But that whole thing and worldview, and her point was more like, we actually need to reframe it in terms of the things that are important to people, because music and culture is incredibly important to people. And it's I guess, going back to that point, it's that to me is the bit that I find missing in our debate in terms of music is, people make the ethics argument, they make the training is bad argument, they get angry and there's pitchforks at the gates of big tech and stuff. But actually, I see the business bit getting ready. I don't know. I see that. I struggle. How do we make that work on a scale that's bigger than just independent markets? So someone said something on a legal side that I thought was interesting framing once, which is in the US, and you can tell me if this is actually bogus or not, actually, because this was a pub conversation. In the US, litigation's baked into the process. Federal government doesn't get involved till litigation fails. That is enshrined in the way of doing things. In Europe, on the other hand, it's no, think really hard about the rails, build the rails for how these things should work, build that and then enforce it. And Europe, some way, because of the DMA and all the stuff that's happened around big tech into Europe anyway, has built some of the rails for that so it can move faster on AI. And then I think you framed very neatly where maybe the UK sits somewhere in the middle of those things. But how do we turn that machine into doing stuff? Do we just have to wait till it all churns out, or are there things we should all be doing or changes to the way we should be arguing?
we should be putting ourselves out there. We should be having these conversations. We should be communicating the value of art in and of itself as an end of human expression. You know, before people could record music, either through electronic means of recording the sound, or before they could read or write, or papyrus was invented, or a quill, we were still, as human beings, emoting, expressing, singing, madrigals and hymns and prayers and blues and jazz and spirituals. You look at Aboriginal people and tribes in places that have never seen a phone or a mast or anything, and it's something inside of us, a need to express the human condition, and we've got to protect that. I think we've got to protect that, and there's no reason why we can't be at the forefront of the loudest voices saying, just remember that this is what it is to be human, and that still has a value in today's world.
It's super interesting to think about that long history of music making, musicking, and originality. 5,000 years ago, somebody started banging on a rock and they were like, this is nice. And now, somebody's prompting a generative AI model and something comes out and they go like, this is nice. And how vastly different that is. But yeah, I think the need to protect that human expression and to kind of define that human expression in certain lawful terms is a great way to end. Thanks so much for joining us, Raffaella. This is really enlightening. I love the fact that there's been actual answers, but mostly just more questions. And that's a good place to take it from there, I think. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.